Welcome back to Twisted Tales, the channel where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. The story you are about to hear is a chilling reminder that the most monstrous acts can be born from the most ordinary of lives. It's a tale of forbidden passion, betrayal, and a murder plot so cold-blooded it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family. Before we unravel this shocking story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single one of our gripping narratives. Now, settle in as we explore the chilling affair that spiraled into a deadly conspiracy. The suburban tranquility of Maple Creek was a carefully constructed facade, a place where manicured lawns and pristine picket fences concealed the messy realities of the lives within. For the Miller family, their two-story colonial home was a stage for a picture-perfect life. There was David, the hard-working husband, a man whose gentle nature and unwavering dedication to his family were the bedrock of their existence. His wife, Sarah, was the epitome of a devoted spouse and mother, her days filled with PTA meetings and the quiet hum of domesticity. Their daughter, Emily, had recently married her college sweetheart, a charismatic and ambitious young man named Ethan. To the outside world, they were the embodiment of the American dream. But within the walls of their home, a dark and insidious secret was taking root, a secret that would ultimately shatter the illusion of their perfect lives. It began subtly, with lingering glances and conversations that strayed into dangerously intimate territory. Helen, Sarah's mother, had always been a formidable presence in their lives. A widow in her late 50s, she possessed a magnetic charm and a sharp wit that drew people to her. After her husband's death, she had moved in with the Millers, her presence a comforting constant in their home. Ethan, with his easy smile and confident demeanor, had quickly won over his new in-laws. David saw in him a reflection of his younger self, a man eager to build a life for his family. Sarah adored him, grateful for the happiness he brought to her daughter. But it was Helen who seemed to form the most profound connection with him. Their conversations started innocently enough, shared moments over coffee in the morning or a glass of wine in the evening. They discovered a mutual love for classic literature and a shared cynicism about the world that ached for a kindred spirit. Ethan found in Helen a confidant, someone who understood his ambitions and his frustrations in a way that Emily, in her youthful optimism, could not. Helen, in turn, saw in Ethan a vitality and a passion that had long been absent from her own life. He was a reminder of a time when she too had been filled with dreams and desires before the quiet resignation of widowhood had settled upon her. The first time their hands brushed, a jolt of electricity passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken tension that had been simmering beneath the surface. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to ignite a spark that would soon become an inferno. The affair began in stolen moments, in hushed whispers in the hallway when the rest of the house was asleep, in secret rendezvous in the garden under the cloak of darkness. They were consumed by a passion that was as thrilling as it was forbidden, a dangerous dance on the edge of a precipice. Emily, blissfully unaware, saw only the growing closeness between her husband and her grandmother, interpreting it as a sign of a happy, blended family. David and Sarah, too, were oblivious, their lives consumed by the familiar rhythms of work and home. As the weeks turned into months, the affair intensified. The initial thrill of their secret trysts gave way to a deeper, more dangerous emotional connection. They became each other's confidants, sharing their deepest fears and their most intimate desires. Ethan found himself confiding in Helen about his frustrations with his job, his feeling of being trapped in a life that was not of his own making. Helen, in turn, opened up about the loneliness that had consumed her since her husband's death, her longing for a connection that went beyond the familial bonds that defined her. Their shared sense of dissatisfaction with their lives became a powerful aphrodisiac, a common ground upon which they built their illicit world. They saw in each other a reflection of their own unfulfilled desires, a chance to escape the mundane reality of their lives. But the closer they became, the more reckless they grew. Their stolen moments became more brazen, their conversations more daring. They were playing with fire, and the flames were growing higher with each passing day. One evening, David, working late in his home office, overheard a hushed conversation in the hallway. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate, a low murmur of shared secrets that sent a shiver down his spine. He dismissed it as his imagination, but a seed of suspicion had been planted. He began to watch them more closely, noticing the lingering glances, the subtle touches, the way their conversations would abruptly stop when he entered a room. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and the picture that was emerging was one of betrayal and deceit. The first confrontation was quiet, almost anticlimactic. David, his voice heavy with a pain he could barely contain, asked Sarah if she had noticed anything unusual about her mother and Ethan. Sarah, ever the optimist, dismissed his concerns as paranoia, assuring him that he was reading too much into a harmless friendship. But David's unease only grew. He started coming home from work early, hoping to catch them in the act. He checked their phone records, a desperate man searching for proof of a betrayal he already knew in his heart to be true. The confirmation of his fears came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He had come home early, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was quiet, and he found them in the living room, locked in a passionate embrace, their bodies entwined in a dance of forbidden desire. The world seemed to stop for a moment, the only sound the rain lashing against the windowpane. The look of shock and guilt on their faces was all the confirmation he needed. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family had shattered into a million pieces. The ensuing confrontation was a maelstrom of emotions. Accusations were hurled, tears were shed, and the ugly truth of their betrayal was laid bare. Emily, her world crumbling around her, was inconsolable. Sarah, caught between her husband's pain and her mother's betrayal, was a silent, shell-shocked witness to the destruction of her family. In the aftermath of the revelation, the house became a battleground of resentment and recrimination. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the palpable weight of their shattered trust. Ethan, stripped of his charismatic facade, was a man exposed, his ambition and his charm now seen for the manipulative tools they were. Helen, her magnetic allure tarnished by her betrayal, was a pariah in her own home. The affair had been exposed, but the seeds of deception had already taken root, and they were about to blossom into something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The initial shock of the affair was about to give way to a cold, calculated rage, a rage that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The perfect suburban family was about to become the epicenter of a murder plot, and the quiet streets of Maple Creek would soon be stained with the blood of their betrayal. The revelation of the affair was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through the Miller household, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The once happy home was now a tinderbox of raw emotions, each member of the family grappling with the fallout in their own way. Emily, her heart shattered by the dual betrayal of her husband and her grandmother, retreated into a shell of silent despair. The man she had loved and trusted had been a stranger to her, his affection a carefully constructed lie. The grandmother she had adored, the woman who had been her confidant and her role model, had become a monster in her eyes. Sarah, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her love for her mother, was a woman adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. She was angry at her mother for her betrayal, but she was also filled with a sense of guilt, wondering if she had somehow failed to see the signs, if she had been so caught up in her own life that she had been blind to the darkness that had been festering in her own home. David, the wronged husband, was consumed by a righteous anger that burned with the intensity of a wildfire. He had been a good husband, a good father, a good son-in-law. He had provided for his family, he had loved them unconditionally, and this was his reward? To be made a fool of in his own home? But it was Helen and Ethan who were in the most precarious position. Their affair, once a source of illicit excitement, had become a leaden weight around their necks. They were pariahs in the house, their every move scrutinized, their every word met with suspicion. In the crucible of this domestic turmoil, a new and far more dangerous idea began to take shape. It was born out of a shared sense of desperation, a feeling that they were trapped in a situation from which there was no escape. The idea was first voiced by Helen, her voice a low, venomous whisper in the dead of night. They were in the garden, their secret meeting place, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the unspoken tension between them. "He'll never forgive us," she said, her words a stark and brutal assessment of their situation. "He'll make our lives a living hell." Ethan, his face a mask of grim resignation, nodded in agreement. He had seen the look in David's eyes, a cold, unforgiving fury that promised a lifetime of retribution. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Helen's response was a long time coming. She stared into the darkness, her mind a whirlwind of desperate thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was chillingly calm, her words a poison that would seep into the very foundations of their lives. "We have to get rid of him," she said. The words hung in the air between them, a monstrous proposition that was as terrifying as it was seductive. Ethan stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a dawning, terrible understanding. He had always been a man of ambition, a man who was willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. He had married Emily not for love, but for the lifestyle she represented, the easy entry into a world of comfort and privilege. David, with his successful business and his comfortable home, had been the key to that world. But now, David was the obstacle, the one person standing between him and the life he craved. And Helen, with her cunning mind and her ruthless determination, was offering him a way to remove that obstacle. The genesis of the murder plot was a slow and insidious process. It began with whispered conversations in the dead of night, with shared glances that spoke of a dark and terrible secret. They were two people bound together by their shared guilt and their shared desperation, and in that unholy alliance, they found the courage to contemplate the unthinkable. They began to plan, their conversations a chilling litany of aniferous schemes and cold-blooded calculations. They researched poisons on the internet, their search history a digital trail of their murderous intent. They discussed alibis, their minds working in tandem to construct a web of lies that would shield them from suspicion. As their plan took shape, a strange transformation came over them. The guilt and the fear that had consumed them in the immediate aftermath of the affair were replaced by a cold, apathetic resolve. They were no longer two people caught in the throes of a forbidden passion. They were partners in a deadly conspiracy, their shared secret a bond that was stronger than any vow. The house, once a symbol of their perfect family, became the stage for their murderous rehearsals. They moved through their days with a chilling duplicity, their smiles and their pleasantries a mask for the darkness that was festering within them. The chosen method was poison, a slow and undetectable poison that would mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. It was a clean and efficient way to get rid of David, a way to make his death look like a tragic but natural event. Helen, with her knowledge of gardening and her access to a variety of plants, was to procure the poison. Ethan, with his close proximity to David, was to administer it. It was a simple plan, but its simplicity was its genius. The day they chose was a Friday, the end of a long and stressful week. David, they knew, would be tired, his guard down. He would have a glass of whiskey before dinner, a nightly ritual that would become the instrument of his demise. The hours leading up to the murder were a study in surreal normalcy. The family sat down to dinner, the conversation stilted and forced, the air thick with unspoken tensions. David, oblivious to the sword of Damocles hanging over his head, talked about his day at work, his plans for the weekend. After dinner, as David settled into his favorite armchair with his glass of whiskey, Helen and Ethan exchanged a knowing glance. The poison was in the glass, a tasteless, odorless harbinger of death. They watched him drink, their hearts pounding in their chests, their faces a mask of feigned nonchalance. They were on the precipice of a terrible and irrevocable act, and in that moment, there was no turning back. As the poison began to take effect, David clutched his chest, a look of confusion and pain on his face. He gasped for air, his body convulsing, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. Emily and Sarah rushed to his side, their screams of terror echoing through the house. But it was too late. David Miller, The kind and gentle man who had been the bedrock of their family was dead. In the chaotic aftermath of his death, Helen and Ethan played their parts to perfection. They were the grieving mother-in-law and son-in-law, their faces etched with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. They comforted Emily and Sarah, their words of sympathy a cruel and twisted mockery of the truth. The police were called, and the official cause of death was ruled as a massive heart attack. It was a tragic and unexpected loss, but there was no reason to suspect foul play. David had been a man in his late 50s, a prime candidate for a heart condition. The perfect murder had been committed, but the seeds of their deception had been sown, and they were about to reap a bitter harvest. The guilt of their crime, a guilt they had so carefully suppressed, began to gnaw at them, a relentless and unforgiving tormentor. And in the shadows, a silent witness had seen more than they could have ever imagined. The carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel, and the truth, in all its ugly and brutal reality, was about to be exposed. The shocking murder plot had been executed, but the final act of this twisted drama was yet to be played out. In the immediate aftermath of David's death, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the Miller household. It was a silence born of grief, of course, but for Helen and Ethan, it was also the silence of a shared and terrible secret. They had committed the perfect crime, a murder so cunningly disguised as a natural death that no one had suspected a thing. They were free, they believed, to build a new life on the ashes of the old. But the ghost of David Miller was not so easily laid to rest. His presence lingered in the house, a constant and accusatory reminder of their crime. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallway, seemed to whisper his name. The guilt, a relentless and unforgiving entity, began to eat away at them. Ethan, once so confident and self-assured, became a shadow of his former self. He was plagued by nightmares, his sleep filled with visions of David's dying moments, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and betrayal. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in the bottom of a bottle, but the alcohol only served to amplify his guilt, to sharpen the edges of his remorse. Helen, too, was unraveling, though in a more subtle and insidious way. The formidable and charismatic woman who had once commanded the attention of every room she entered was now a bundle of nerves, her composure fraying at the seams. She became obsessed with cleanliness, scrubbing the house from top to bottom as if she could somehow wash away the stain of her crime. She would spend hours in the garden, her hands covered in dirt, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of fear and paranoia. Their shared guilt, which had once been a bond between them, now became a source of friction. They began to turn on each other, their whispered conversations in the dead of night now filled with accusations and recriminations. Each saw in the other a reflection of their own weakness, a constant reminder of the terrible thing they had done. "You're going to get us caught," Ethan would hiss, his voice thick with a mixture of alcohol and fear. "You're acting so strangely. People are starting to notice. And you're a drunken mess," Helen would retort, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You're going to confess in a drunken stupor, and then we'll both be finished." Their once passionate affair had curdled into a toxic and codependent relationship, a shared and terrible secret that bound them together even as it tore them apart. Meanwhile, a seed of suspicion had been planted in the mind of the one person they had never considered a threat, Sarah. She had been devastated by her husband's death, but as the initial shock began to wear off, she started to notice things, small and seemingly insignificant details that didn't add up. She noticed the way her mother and Ethan would fall silent whenever she entered a room, the way they would exchange furtive, knowing glances. She noticed Ethan's increasingly erratic behavior, his heavy drinking, his sleepless nights. She noticed her mother's obsessive-compulsive cleaning, her frantic and desperate attempts to maintain an illusion of normalcy. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and the picture that was emerging was a monstrous one. The idea that her own mother and her son-in-law could be capable of such a heinous crime was almost too terrible to contemplate, but the evidence, circumstantial as it was becoming impossible to ignore. The final, damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, David's home office. Sarah had been going through his things, a painful but necessary task, when she came across his personal journal. David had been a meticulous record keeper, and his journal was a detailed account of his thoughts and his fears in the weeks leading up to his death. He had written about his suspicions about Helen and Ethan, his heartbreak at their betrayal, his fear for his own safety. He had written about the overheard conversations, the stolen glances, the palpable tension in the house. It was a chronicle of a man who knew he was in danger, a man who had been living in fear for his life. The journal was the confirmation Sarah had been dreading. The truth, in all its ugly and brutal reality, was laid bare before her. Her mother and her son-in-law were murderers. Armed with this terrible knowledge, Sarah went to the police. The investigation was reopened, and this time the police were looking for a murderer, not a cause of death. They exhumed David's body, and the autopsy revealed what they had been suspecting all along. He had been poisoned. The net began to close in on Helen and Ethan. Their carefully constructed web of lies began to unravel, their alibis falling apart under the scrutiny of the police. Their search history, with its damning evidence of their research into poisons, was discovered. The final nail in their coffin came when the police found traces of the poison in Helen's gardening shed. The trial was a media sensation. The sordid details of the affair and the murder plot splashed across the headlines. The story of the mother-in-law and the son-in-law who had conspired to murder the patriarch of their family was a chilling and captivating tale of suburban Gothic horror. In the end, justice was served. Helen and Ethan were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Their perfect crime had been anything but a clumsy and desperate act of two people who had been consumed by their own selfish desires. The Miller house, once a symbol of the American dream, now stood as a silent and chilling monument to the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary of lives. The manicured lawn was overgrown, the picket fence was in disrepair, and the windows, like vacant eyes, stared out at a world that had been forever changed by the events that had transpired within its walls. Emily, having lost her father, her husband, and her grandmother in one fell swoop, moved away, seeking to escape the ghosts of her past. Sarah, too, left Maple Creek, a woman haunted by the knowledge that the people she had loved and trusted had been capable of such monstrous acts. The story of the Miller family became a cautionary tale, a dark and twisted fable about the destructive power of forbidden passion and the corrosive nature of secrets. It was a reminder that the most ordinary of lives can be a breeding ground for the most extraordinary of evils, and that the line between love and hate, between desire and destruction, is often razor-thin. The quiet suburban tranquility of Maple Creek had been shattered, and the echoes of that shattering would reverberate for years to come, a chilling and unforgettable testament to the darkness that can lie within the human heart.